folded one, no less. Don't open it.
Oh, you can open it if you want. Just don't tell other people what you've got. Right, so we're gonna just finish off here. I think people in the back corner are gonna come, but I think we can briefly chat before they're back. So we're just gonna go through taxes and transfers now. So we only want to look at post-distribution for what we're doing here. But we can use a lot of the same sort of like arguments and ideas other times. It's just often this is what's measured. So taxes are used a way to fund government services. We already chatted through a whole bunch of this before. When we talk about, how much we should raise though, there's also this concept of ability to pay. So someone with a lot of income has more ability to contribute to fund those government services. Okay? And another way of describing this is in terms of what's called equal sacrifice. So you might think that someone with a lot of income has to sacrifice less in terms of welfare or consumption, in terms of how they value it, than someone who's of very low means. Okay? So we often talk that way to justify what we call progressivity. Now, progressivity does not mean that someone on higher incomes is paying more than someone on low incomes. It means that they're paying proportionally more. So you could have a situation where someone who has double the income of someone else is paying 50% more. They would still be paying more, but we would call that a regressive tax. That would be a regressive transfer. Even though someone that's got more income is paying more, it's regressive because they're paying proportionally less. Now, when we look at our friend the Lorenz curve, it's only progressive transfers, so where someone on a higher income is contributing relatively more, that shift that in. Okay? If you do a regressive transfer, it actually shifts it out, even though someone with higher income is paying more. So those two concepts get a little bit confused. So it's good to just put them out there. Now, when we're thinking government services, there might be situations where we're completely fine with it being regressive because it's user pays. It's to use a specific road, and we would want the people using that road to pay a price for it. In that case, we're not thinking about it in terms of progressivity, yada, yada. But if we're thinking about a tax and transfer system where it's about making sure that those who contribute are paying proportionally more if they've got high means, then we would talk in this type of way. And often the justification you'll see in textbooks is, where's my pens? Is this. It's just the idea that as income goes up, marginal utility gets smaller and smaller. So that extra utility is getting tinier and tinier. Okay? So you'll see that justified, and it sounds very believable. An issue with thinking that way is that if someone's got high income, they might be much more willing to sacrifice time to do so. They might value consumption a lot more than the other person. So it doesn't necessarily follow. People are very different. People all around the world, all around your society are very different. So we need to be free and frank that when we say ability to pay an equal sacrifice, we're often assuming that there's a reason why we think that is fair. I think it's fairly easy to justify a lot of the time, but we need to be honest about it. So when we talk about a transfer of income with a tax, we're actually really saying the same sort of thing. If you give people on low incomes money, that's like a negative tax. You can sum the amount of tax paid, the amount of transfers received, and if the transfers received is higher, you're providing money. And so if you have a tax transfer system that gives to people on lower incomes and takes from people on higher incomes, it is progressive. Okay. So cool. That's all nice enough. But again, with this Lorenz curve stuff, we're treating everything like a fixed basket of income. When you go and do these things, it will change behavior. And these behavioral changes can reduce your ability to redistribute. So one thing that could happen is you could tax a high income earner more and they could decide to work less or shift to a job that's less stress. In that case, less income gets produced, and that reduces your ability to redistribute between people relative to before. Also, your high income earner could turn around and just start lying about their income. Okay? They could just say, I have no income. What are you talking about? And in that situation, it also reduces your ability to actually go and redistribute. So a solution to that could be poll taxes. You don't make the tax contingent on someone's income, you make it contingent on them. You have to pay this tax. Now, a poll tax is extremely regressive because everyone has to pay the same tax. And we might say, we didn't mean that. What we do mean is if you are someone that we think will be high income, you have to pay a higher poll tax. That will look progressive, okay? So this is called tagging. You find characteristics of individuals that are associated with high income. You find these characteristics that are hard for them to change, and then you put a tax on them based on that characteristic. Now, I'm expecting a lot of people feel pretty uncomfortable with that. One of the most common examples is that we should tax tall people more. Now, this suits me. I'm pretty short. Okay, so great. But I'm sure tall people don't feel that good about it. Now, what's the justification for that? On average, tall people earn quite a lot more than short people. Okay, even when you adjust for age and everything else. It just seems that tall people earn higher income. Now, it's very costly to change your height, right? I'm not going to turn around and cut off my legs to cut my tax liability. And as a result, there won't be this change in behavior and we'll be able to raise funds efficiently. That sounds great. But the fact that we immediately feel uncomfortable about that, about taxing people based on their height, tells us that there might be some other principles we need to think about. So we're going to touch on those after we've played a game. Game. Right, so I handed out pieces of paper. There's also some magical other players here, and so the distribution of incomes involved will be represented with these people as well. Now, feel free to open it up and look at what your number is. Okay. Don't tell other people. Definitely don't tell me. I am the tax man. Okay. I want to take some of your money so that I can spend it on my own goods and services or whatever I'm going to do. Okay. I want $24. There are 24 of these pieces of paper. Okay. Now, I happen to know that the sum of all the amounts on all the pieces of paper is $64. I also know the distribution over all the pieces of paper. There's a coefficient of variation of 0.33, I think. 0.3333. So I know the amount of inequality, I know the amount of income, and I know if I charge a tax rate of 37.5%, then I will get my $24. Right? Great. Okay, so I know how much income there is. I've seen the national accounts. I want to charge that, but I don't know what anyone's income is. I have no way of telling or verifying it. Okay? All I can do is walk up to you and ask you what your income is. Okay? And then say, give me 37.5% of it. So if I ask you what your income is, what are you going to tell me?
Might be $1.
You're going to tell me $1?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. I mean, I've got no reason to believe or disbelieve. What about you? What's your income?
$2.
$2? Okay. What's your income?
20 cents.
20 cents, yeah. What's your income? Huh? 8, really? Whew, okay. Cool, I'll definitely tax you. $1, go.
0.
0, yeah. $1, yeah. What about 0? Cool. Is everyone feeling comfortable giving me their incomes here? Right. Well, I tell you what, I can tell by there being some positive numbers that people were feeling surprisingly generous because I would tell you 0. I have no way of verifying or punishing you, right? You want to keep your income because you can go and buy consumption with it. It's imaginary income though, so maybe not that much consumption. So as a result, I ask you what your income is, I charge you 37.5% of it. That means I take quite a bit off Golnara there. But then, when I heard a 20 cents, I'm not going to get much there, yada, yada, yada. Now, I know I didn't write down a 20 cents, so there was a little bit of fibbing there. But what you can have is people will try to put in a lower number that's believable. What's happening when that's happening is people are trying to trade off between the fact I might know, I might be able to find out, I might be able to verify, and to charge them. Okay, I'll put a penalty on them. They're trading off between that and just being a bit greedy. Now, voluntary compliance, some people gave me genuine numbers, okay? Such as Gulnara giving me the 8. Because there were genuine numbers, unless she was exaggerating, in which case that's cool. But because there were genuine numbers, it shows that some people like voluntarily complying. They're like, look, I see tax as part of what I do, right? I see it part of my contribution to society, I'm willing to contribute, right? And so in New Zealand, we try to have a system that incentivizes voluntary compliance, yada, yada, because, it's just nicer. But unless I can tell, people are going to lie. Okay? So you want to set up systems that do, in the background, figure out what people's incomes are. Now, I could also use tagging because I do have some information. So I know pink, on average, has a higher number than yellow. Okay? I know that pink has a higher number than yellow. So there are two ways I could go about this. If I didn't know that, I could charge everyone $1 because there are 24 pieces of paper. That gets me my 24 bucks. Now, I know pink on average has a higher number than yellow. So I might say, oh, look, I still have redistribution I'm interested in doing. So I'm going to charge $2 to pink and $0 to yellow. Okay? Now, that's great. If I do that, I know there's 12 pink sheets, and I'll get $24. Does anyone have an issue with me, a pink player, with me charging them $2? Yeah? There's a few people with an issue. Well, what's the issue? You have no dollars. Unbelievable. That's pretty rough. So you see there that I've noticed that the average, and so the average pink player has, what is it, like it's 3.333. Okay, but there's quite a spread in there, and there is a bunch of zeros. Okay, and because there are zeros, there is someone who has no income that's being charged a tax. Okay, and we might see that as very, very unfair. Now, when we take height, just because height's related to income, there could still be a situation where there's a spread in terms of height. And so turning around and charging them on that basis might seem unfair. But what about even if there was no spread? If people that were taller just did get more, okay? Well, in that case, why are they getting more? What's the innate reason? Remember when we talked about someone just valuing consumption more? If we knew someone just valued consuming more than others, and then we decided to make them contribute more, and they were actually having to sacrifice more by doing so, that could be a bit of an ethical dilemma as well. Whenever we talk about this redistribution, we want to be really clear about what the fairness principles are. Now, inequality isn't everything. It relates to those equity ideas we had earlier, but when we look at a distribution, there are other things that we should keep in mind when talking about it. Okay, so the first thing we had in terms of principles was equal sacrifice. And we noted that it could be that some people really value consumption while others don't. And as a result, equal sacrifice isn't just saying you've got a higher income so you should contribute more. Okay? Non-discrimination is a pretty key principle as well. When I went and picked people based on the color of their little bits of paper, I was discriminating with my poll tax. Now, this is not the only place economists raise poll taxes that are dependent on a characteristic. The height tax one is sort of a ridiculous example that people use to think about ethical principles. But serious economists talk about an age-related poll tax all the time, okay? That at different ages, you should pay a different tax rate. And there's a lot of economists that strongly believe that's fair. But if you ask normal people, okay, which are definitely not economists, there's a strong visceral reaction to that because of the way it relates to certain principles of discrimination. Okay. Then we have the idea of natural rights. Where did the income come from? Okay. If someone has sacrificed their own time and used their own resources, why does someone else have a claim on using those? Now, we can have endless debates about what is social and what is personal and the such, but it's a debate that has to be had when you think about redistribution. And people have very different views here and can get very fired up as soon as you say something different. Someone that says that ultimately there's no such thing as property rights, we're all renting land off the state, would find some people in agreement, and other people would get very fired up and say, how dare the state act like they have those rights over my land? Now, those debates will always happen through time, and there's a very old history in them, but that legal concept and the way it relates to ethical principles has to be central for how we talk about redistribution. And that's why economists start to steer away from it, because they get scared of talking to lawyers. Behind all of this, you've got your true ability to pay. this has to refer to your need, okay? So as well as that type of consumption and value of consumption, if people have different needs for things, then just saying that they should sacrifice based on their income will miss that. So we want to take into account the fact that there's different needs, and if we can adjust measures for a measurement of need, that can be useful. Often when you see Gini coefficients reported in New Zealand, they'll do things like remove housing costs. Now, that can be a bit sketchy because your housing cost, you might decide to just have a bigger house. Now, does that mean that your needs are now higher? Or does it mean you're consuming a bigger house because you think that's cool? It's actually something you're getting as a value. So separating these things can be really difficult. We might think that people are getting rewarded for risk, right? And we might think that people are getting rewarded for effort. Now, if we think that we can't observe risk-taking and we can't observe effort, then turning around and saying, oh, you might have been remunerated for the effort, but we're going to take that away and give it to someone else, can disincentivize that effort. In some way, we would want people to keep taking on effort insofar as the marginal value is greater than the marginal cost. And we wouldn't want to think about a situation where they're disincentivized from doing so. There's going to be a tension between that and between having equality of outcomes or redistribution as well. So often when we talk about redistribution, if it's based on what we call rent seeking or a lack of competition, we don't expect it to affect a fair reward for risk or effort, something that incentivizes them to do it. Okay? And so that redistribution can be seen as, quite costless. A large part of the political spectrum would agree with breaking up monopolies and introducing competition. However, when you have a situation where someone does have to sacrifice a lot of their time or take on risk to do something, we wouldn't necessarily want to take away their whole reward for doing that. There's some sacrifice they're doing in the background in terms of sacrificing their time and not taking on a stable job that we would want to consider before reducing their remuneration. Okay? So when we look through these ethical principles that all come up, we can see that just like when we look at GDP and we say it misses non-market activity, okay? When we look at GDP and we say it misses important elements of well-being, inequality measures are doing exactly the same thing. People that stick inequality in a well-being metric and say, oh, we've solved it, we're worried about the distribution, are being naive. Whenever you think about a policy, whenever you think about what's going on in a society, inequality is a catchphrase for thinking about the distribution, but there's a whole lot of things that need to be considered to talk about what's fair or unfair, right? And our whole goal today was just to understand what the measures do, what the measures represent, and give a framework for thinking around that, not to tell us to go one way or the other. If one of you is a 100% communist that wants to just remove markets and have social property, that's fine. If someone else is a strict libertarian or an anarchist that wants to get rid of the central state, that's all cool as well. We can use this framework to think about, is what you're saying consistent with certain rights, and why are you willing to put certain ones over others? Cool. So that's us, and yeah, we're all done in time. So thank you for listening to me. I'll see you all in the future.